Hello, beautiful souls. I trust you're all doing super well today. I thought today I would share another paranormal story time with you. One of the most significant stories I have to tell is the story of 104. 104 was the house that I lived in with my dad. I lived there for collectively just over 10 years. Some really scary stuff happened in that house. Belt up, settle in, get yourself some popcorn and a blankie, and let's get into it. I have my blankie. I don't have any popcorn though. So there was nothing particularly remarkable about 104. It was a very typical English 3-bedroom house, a semi-detached house. I'll put a picture here just for anyone who might not know what a semi-detached house is. It's basically two houses that are stuck together so they share a wall. So I'm not sure exactly on the timeline of the history of the houses. All I know is that they were built by a chap in the 1920s. He purchased the land and he popped two houses on it. I believe he lived there for the course of his lifetime with his family. Beyond that, I don't know what the history is of it. What I can say is it wasn't initially haunted. I mean, it was, but certainly not in the way that, for example, the apartment, my haunted apartment, I'll put the video link up here if you haven't seen it already. The house that I previously lived in had hundreds of years worth of haunting history, whereas 104 didn't. It was just a very typical house. My family purchased 104 in 2002 or 2003, and they purchased it from a man named Richard. He went by Dick. He raised his family there, his wife and his children, they all lived there until the children grew up and blew the nest, and then it was just himself and his wife. His wife got quite ill. I don't know what the nature of her illness was, but this was much later in their lives. They were an older, like a little old couple. I'll tell you what I do know about her. I don't know her name, unfortunately. I think my dad probably knew what her name was, but unfortunately he's passed now, so I can't ask him. All I know is that she was elderly. Dick installed a full bathroom on the ground floor of the house because she could no longer get up and down the stairs. I don't know if she died in the house, but she died, and he was the only one left living in the house, and so he wanted to downsize, and that's why he was selling the house, and then my parents bought it. I did meet Dick and his now adult daughter when my parents were looking around the house and considering whether or not they were going to buy it, and I was a part of that visit. So I met them both and looked around the house, and I saw how the house was before my parents bought it, because my parents did renovate the house and change some rooms around and put walls up and take walls down and things. The house was quite old-fashioned, as you would expect a house that had an elderly couple living in it. He and his wife clearly really loved that house. The garden was quite big, and there was a pond in the middle of the garden that Dick kept koi in, and he'd built by hand a Japanese style bridge going over the pond. It was quite a small pond, but it was very sweet. You only do things like that in your home when you're fond of it and you know that you're going to be living there for a long time, right? So my parents purchased the house and immediately started renovations, changed the layout of the ground floor of the house so that instead of having to walk through all of the reception rooms to get to the kitchen in the back of the house, they put a corridor in, and this corridor ran from the front door all the way through to the kitchen in the back. This detail is important for later in my story, the fact that there was a long corridor running through basically the entire length of the ground floor of the house. When we moved into the house, all was well. All was, as normal as it would be. It wasn't really until the building work had pretty much finished that then I started to notice some happenings. I had a TV. So again, we're talking like early 2000s, Flat screen TVs weren't prevalent at that time. You only had a flat screen TV if you had a lot of money, which I didn't, because I was, 19 and I was earning pretty good money, actually, come to think of it, but I used to spend it on getting drunk at the weekends, so I didn't have much really left over to buy myself a nice flat screen TV. So I had one of those small, it's about this size, a small like box television. I had it on one of those arm stands in the corner of my room. I think the first haunting I noticed, which for a while I didn't realize that it was actually paranormal activity. I just thought it was my TV, there's something wrong with my TV. Those of you who are the same sort of age group as me and you remember having TVs like that in your room, you know how finicky they were. They would often turn on and off by themselves, or maybe the channel would change, because if your next door neighbor had their TV remote programmed at the same frequency as your television, they could change the channels for their TV in their house next door, and they would change your television as well. So it wasn't like every time they changed the channel, yours would change, because generally they would have a different TV to you, and it wasn't like every single time they pressed a button, it would change yours. But every now and then, your TV would do something weird, and you would just put it down to, oh, it must be next door and their TV remote. A lot of the time I would dismiss this stuff. But then it became very, very regular, and that's when I realised it's not any of those things. It's something else. At night, I would press the standby button on the controller and you'd get that little red light on the TV. There was a bout of time where it wasn't every night, but it was almost every night. I would say it was probably 5 nights out of a week. The TV would wake me up because it turned on in the middle of the night. And I would wake up because there's light in my room where there shouldn't be light. And I'm quite a sensitive sleeper when it comes to light. I prefer to sleep in complete darkness. So if there's light that comes on, generally that will wake me up. But it would always be on white noise, which doesn't make sense, because the terrestrial channels as they were then, it's all been switched off now, but we had channels 1 to 5 here in the UK. Those channels, when they're not broadcasting any programs in the middle of the night, they put a holding screen up. It's not like they just pull the plug on the TV station and then you get white noise and that black and white, the static screen. There was no explanation as to why I would be getting that on my TV, and that's what kind of made me realize this is not it's just being glitchy. This is actually something happening. It was happening so frequently, instead of using the controller to put it on standby at night, I would go over and physically press the on button, the power button, to turn it off properly, until one night, the TV woke me up because it came on in the night. The only way it could have come on was if someone had pressed that button, and it was white noise again. The on button, I still remember, it wasn't just a simple, easy to press button. It was like a big rectangular plastic button that was obviously it was quite wide like this, but it was obviously only physically connected to the internal bit of the TV in the center, because it would wobble like this. So you had to put your all 4 fingers on it to press it in, because if you just pushed it with one finger and you pushed it at either side of it, it wouldn't actually work. So finicky, right? These TVs were so finicky, and because it was my TV, I knew exactly how to work it. So it required quite a hefty push to turn this thing on or off. It came on by itself in the middle of the night, and it woke me up again. So from then on, I would just pull the plug out the socket in the wall. So there was just no power even going to it. And that's what finally stopped it from happening. When I did that, that's when the real freaky stuff started happening. If that wasn't freaky enough, I would frequently get woken up to feeling the bed covers are being pulled off of me from the foot of the bed, someone's at the foot of the bed pulling the corner, but it felt like someone had grabbed the corner and they were just doing this with it. It's not like someone threw the covers off me. It was never anything like really aggressive. It was just like a little tug, like, but each time it had more pull, like it was pulling more like this. So I would feel the covers, like I like to sleep with the covers like this over my face, like just my eyes sticking out. And I would feel the covers go like this, and that's what would wake me up. And then I would just like pull them back, and there was no resistance, so I would just pull it back over me, and it was like whoever was pulling it had let go. That happened a lot. Again, that didn't happen every night. It was probably like 3 or 4 nights in a week that would happen. It was very often. And you know, it got to a point where I just didn't like being in that room really anymore. So it was around that time that I started spending more time away from home. I'd still come home, you know, I like all my stuff was there. I would come and, you know, change my clothes. I would shower there. I would continue to live my life like from that house as like a home base, but I didn't sleep there as much anymore. If I could help it, I would just stay at friends' houses. Inevitably, though, there would be nights where I couldn't go and, you know, crash on someone's sofa, so I would be in that room. And it was on those days that I would notice that things would go missing, or they wouldn't be where I left them. My TV remote is a great example here. That used to frequently get moved. I'm quite meticulous about having homes for objects. Like the TV remote always lives in this spot. My hand moisturizer always lives in this spot. My makeup bag always goes here. You know, my glasses always go here when I take them off. Like everything has its place, and I know where everything is, and everything might look like chaos to everyone else, but I know where everything is. It's all in order. I mean, honestly, these days I'm a lot tidier and a lot more organized, but back then I was quite untidy, but I knew where everything was. I was, like I say, quite meticulous about when I finished using this object, it goes back where I got it from, because that's its home. TV remote was no different. TV remote lived on my bedside table right here, because I'd be sat in bed watching TV remote's here, I'd use it. I might put it down on the bed like whilst I'm actually using it, but then when I finished using it, boom, right there, bedside table. Pretty often I would just, you know, be looking at the TV and I would just reach over, it's not there, and then I would see it across the room on top of my chest of drawers. Well, I didn't put it there. I know I didn't put it there because I'd literally just used it. I'm watching the TV, I changed the channel, I put it down, and then, I don't know, an hour or so later, I reach over, it's no longer there, now it's across the room, and I haven't moved in that entire time. So when things like that started happening, I got even more freaked out because I couldn't explain it. And it's not like I saw the controller like floating across the room, like a ghost was carrying it across the room and put it. It's just I still don't have any explanation for that. It's like the object just teleported across my room. I just don't know. I just don't know. Another one was my hairbrush. I didn't have dreadlocks back then, and I used a hairbrush every day. My hairbrush, again, it had its place where it lived, and it was always in that place. And I had a full-length mirror in my room, so I didn't need to take the brush out of the room. It's not like I took the brush to the bathroom to use it and then I would bring it back up and put it in my room. The brush never left my room. I remember one day my hairbrush went missing, and it went missing for an entire week. It was the same kind of thing with the TV remote. My hairbrush would get moved around my room and I would find it in different places. Sometimes I'd find it in the bottom of my wardrobe. Sometimes I'd find it inside a drawer where it doesn't get kept at all. I would just find it in weird places. Sometimes I'd find it under my bed. But yeah, I remember on one occasion it went missing for like an entire week, and I was getting really frustrated about it. And I ended up going into town and buying a new hairbrush because I thought I'd just lost it. And then one day I needed to get some shoe polish for my shoes for work, and we kept shoe polish in the cupboard under the sink in the kitchen. So I went downstairs and I opened up the cupboard, and there was my hairbrush. Like, how did it get there? None of my family members are like pranksters. I grew up with a younger brother. He never did things like that. He was like a teenager when I was a young adult. There's 6 years between us and he's younger than me. But he didn't, like, he never went in my room. And I trust that he never went in my room. Like, it wasn't him. It wasn't my dad. Like, no one moved it. And of course, I was very vocal about all of this stuff. My parents were just like samesies, you know. They had objects that they used regularly that would also get misplaced. All of us just put it down to, it was a little old lady, Dick's wife, who passed away. We've moved into their family home that they lived in for well over 30 years. Not only have we moved in and taken over that house now, but we've changed everything. We took out the bathroom that was upstairs. We've put in a corridor downstairs. We've sealed off one of like the doors that went between the front room and the reception room in the back. It had glass sliding doors. We sealed that up completely, took the doors out, put a wall in. So you could no longer walk through there. Instead, you would walk through the corridor. You know, we changed a lot of things. I can understand why that would have bothered her. I think, like, put yourself in her shoes. You lived in that house since you were newlyweds. You've had your children. They've grown up and moved out. You've been in that house, like, all that time. You pass away and then a new family moves in and they just like change everything. You'd feel, I think I would feel a bit like, oh, but I'm so attached to this house and now these people have come in and like knocked walls down and stuff. I think I would feel a bit sad about it, you know, like that those people are being a bit ruthless with something that's very sentimental to me. I'm assuming that's how she felt, but honestly, my like witchy woo skills weren't really very strong at that point in time. If you guys are interested in me telling the story of Alice and, you know, my witchy woo-ness, then I'm more than happy to explain that and give you guys like a sort of timeline, because now I consider myself to be like a psychic medium. Whereas back then I really didn't, because I was very in touch with it as a child and then I wasn't for a long time, and I know I deliberately blocked it out because it was so scary. But it's only really in recent years that I've been more in touch with that kind of stuff. I've always experienced paranormal stuff, but I've deliberately not allowed it into my life and done everything that I could to explain it away. If that stuff was happening now, I'm pretty certain that I'd be able to connect with her and understand how she was feeling and why she was doing these things. But back then I didn't have that like skill. I can only assume these things about her now. But yeah, so we all decided between us that it was her, and perhaps even she had not understood that Dick had moved out and was trying to find him and was wondering where he'd gone. We knew that he had moved to the other side of town, so he hadn't left town. He hadn't gone really very far. In fact, a couple of times he even came and knocked on the door, because I remember once he came and knocked on the door because he'd been walking past and he'd noticed that we'd painted the front door. The front door used to be a dark brown colour, it's like natural wood, and my dad painted it white. And he came and knocked on the door and was like, oh, you've changed the colour of the door, you've painted the door. And he was obviously a bit like, oh, you've changed the colour. Like, he wasn't standoffish about it because he was a very nice man, but he was clearly like, oh, you've changed things, when I think it surprised him that we'd changed things and not left things exactly how they were. I guess he just hadn't allowed himself to consider, it's not my house anymore. People are going to change it. They're going to change they're going to paint the walls. They're going to put different wallpaper up. They're going to change the carpets, whatever. And he'd obviously been so super attached to the house that he hadn't considered that people were going to basically wreck it once he didn't own it anymore. So he came and knocked on the door because he was like, oh, you've changed the door, like you changed the colour of the door. When I opened the door, he immediately like looked around me and he would have seen the corridor that wasn't previously there. He was very polite, but he was clearly quite upset about it. So I think if he felt that way, then she probably also felt that way. But yeah, anyway, we had 2 dogs in that house. One of them was Mitten, who you will remember from my previous videos. Unfortunately, she did pass away at the very ripe age of 19 and a half back in February of this year. September 2004, on my 19th birthday, I brought Mitten into that house as an 8-week-old puppy. But we also had another dog, Gonzo. Gonzo was like a second doggo addition. He didn't come in until Mitten was probably a good couple of years old. We'd all been living in this house for, you know, a good few years, and the activity, it kind of went through phases where nothing would happen for months at a time, and then there'd be a big flurry of activity for like a few weeks to a month, and then nothing again for another handful of months. Thinking about it, it was almost like she needed to gather her energy for that amount of time to then go and hide hairbrushes and remote controls. She wasn't messing with my TV anymore because now I was unplugging it from the wall. Yeah, she obviously needed like a fair amount of energy to be able to do all this stuff. If you were sitting in the front room and you were looking out of the door into the corridor, there's the staircase going up like this. You could see the staircase. You couldn't see the top and you couldn't see the bottom, but you could see the center of it from sitting in the living room. I would be sat on the sofa talking to Dad. The two dogs were sitting in the room looking out of the room, and both of them in unison were going like this. Like they were watching someone slowly ascend the stairs, and they did that often, and that was quite scary. Then one day my mother came home and she said that she had walked home from work through our local graveyard and she noticed a fresh grave along the path, and when she looked at the headstone, it had Dick's name on it. The activity completely stopped after that. I think he had probably been buried for like no less than a week, and all of the activity completely stopped, which absolutely confirmed for all of us that it was his wife that was haunting the place. And now that he had also passed on, they were together again, and the pair of them had gone off to source, and she no longer felt the need to be hanging around the house anymore. Sad that he passed, but at the same time I'm really happy for the pair of them that she obviously found peace, and so did he, because the pair of them just off they went, and we never heard from either of them ever again. I'd love to say that that is where the story ends, but unfortunately that is only where the story begins. In 2007, there was a devastating flood in my town. It just rained. It just rained and rained and rained, and it didn't stop. And the town flooded, and our house flooded. That was a really difficult year. I slept in that day. I'd been out drinking the night before. I just woke up to my mother and my brother panic shouting from downstairs. They were panicking. I could hear that they were panicking, and that's what woke me up. And then it didn't stop. So I got out of bed and I opened my bedroom door, and something just didn't feel right. I mean, I couldn't even put my finger on exactly what it was to describe it to you, but just something just felt really, really wrong. And then I heard my brother saying, I can't do it. I just can't do it. My mother said in this very defeated voice, we'll just have to let it happen then. And so I now went downstairs, and I got halfway down the stairs, and I was like, what is going on? And the pair of them were pressing their body weight against the front door, like they were trying to stop something from coming in. And I was like, what is going on? There was a window next to the front door, and when I looked at that window, there was water halfway up it. My brother just looked up at me and he was like, there's a flood coming. The house is going to flood. And there was a little window in the front door, and I just peeked through the window, and there was just a wall of water just coming at us down the driveway towards the front door. And I was like, oh my God. And they both looked at me and were like, yeah. Because I think they were both in shock. I think what they were trying to do was stop the door from bursting open with the weight of the water. And then I'd heard my mother say, well, we're just going to have to let it happen. And so she just unlocked the door, and she just opened the door and just let all the water in. Because if she didn't, the door would have just burst off of its hinges. So I just ran back upstairs and threw clothes on and I looked out of my bedroom window at the garden, and it wasn't a garden anymore. It was just a torrent of water. That day was a really scary day. It's probably one of the most scary days I've ever had, actually, on this earth. You think like waist deep water isn't dangerous, but it really is, because the undercurrent was so strong. Very, very scary day. Ours wasn't the only house that flooded, you know. There were hundreds and hundreds of houses that flooded on that day. It was just awful. There were just people in the streets, just like with bags of belongings, all holding on to each other, families. The insurance companies suddenly had to pay out on hundreds of houses all at once, and a lot of insurance companies went under because of that. Our house didn't get fixed for over a year. So for over a year, the house smelt like a pond. The carpets were squelchy. The house was just full of like debris from other people's houses, where water had flowed through houses and then ended up in our house and then flowed out of our house, because in the end we just had to open the front door and the back door and just let the water through. So the cleanup took a really long time, and the insurance company didn't come to us for over a year, but they did provide a Winnebago for us to live in on the driveway. The reason I'm telling you all of this is because this is where the downfall of 104 began. The energy in the house was haunted, then it was not haunted for a time, and family life was quite nice and the energy was quite high. Dad was, you know, oh, I'm going to do this and that and the other with the house. And then it flooded. And then all of those plans just completely went with the water that flowed through the house. My mother got really depressed. My dad, I guess, just probably felt pretty helpless. The insurance company weren't doing anything, and there was a lot of anger and tears shed in that house. I think my parents just fell out of love with the house when that happened. They never really recovered from it. As the years went by, the insurance company finally came in and refitted, you know, we got a new kitchen and all new carpets, and, you know, everything was fixed and replaced. The stagnant smell finally left, and the house was kind of like new again, but the memories were still there, and the energy was still soaked into the walls. Everything just went downhill from that flood day. And my parents divorced in that house, and my mother moved out, and my brother grew up and left home, and I left home for a time. My boyfriend and I, we split, and I moved back into the house, and then it was just me, my dad, and the dogs. It was nice. I loved living with my dad, but that house at that point had so much sadness and despair and anger in it that it was just a horrible place to be. It felt horrible in there. It's really sad that all of that happened in that space, because the house suffered. I know that a house is an inanimate object, but inanimate objects soak up energy and they become what you make them energetically. I did speak a little bit about lower level entities in my previous video, which is in the Paranormal Storytime playlist. So you know, go and watch those if you're interested in this kind of stuff. What I will say is there is a hierarchy when it comes to the lower levels of energy, and demon is not the only thing that resides in that space. There are many other things. The first thing that will show up long before a demon shows up is what people commonly refer to as a shadow person or a shadow man. I don't like to call them that. I call it an S-man. And the reason I don't use the proper word for it is because when you use words like that, you use words like the D word that I just used. Words are spells. It's called spelling for a reason, right? Words are spells, and you have to be very responsible in how you use language and how you use vocabulary. I do not use those words because you will attract it to you if you keep repeatedly using these words. Whatever words you repeatedly use is what you will attract, which is why I deliberately only use words like positivity, happiness, joy, I am grateful, I am happy. I don't constantly talk about the D's and the S's, right? So an S-man is what I'm going to refer to it as. An S-man is basically a scout. It's the first level. If you're gonna have some nasty, creepy crawly, lower level entity nonsense going on in your building, in a space, a physical space, it always starts with an S-man. D's cannot show up. They can't even get there until a scout has been first. Let's call them scouts. Let's not call it an S-man. Let's call it a scout, right? Scout has to show up first. Their job is basically to go and find delicious low energy to feed off of. So when you have, I did talk about this in my previous video, so I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I do explain it a little bit more there. When you get low energy in a physical space like a house, some horrible stuff's happened, the energetic frequency has been lowered in that spot. That's when you get scouts will show up. Just their presence alone also lowers the energy of the place. So the longer you have one of those hanging around, the worse the energy will get, the worse it will feel, and the lower the frequency will become. But their job is to find a delicious feeding ground for other entities such as D's. Their job also is to just stick around and bring the frequency down, because the lower the frequency, the easier it is for them to get in, them and their friends. You find scouts in places where there's been some horrible stuff going on. That's exactly what happened with 104. A scout showed up. A few of them showed up. They would hang out in the corridor, that long corridor that I told you would be significant later in the story. Here it is. Because it was a long corridor with no windows, it was very dark in there. There was a light in there, but it wasn't always switched on, and no natural light could really get to the center of the corridor. That corridor started to feel really horrible. It got to a point where I would hurry down there. I didn't like to go down there, but you had to go down there to get to the kitchen. The scouts started hanging out in that corridor, so you would basically have to walk through them to get to where you wanted to go, and every time you walked through it, it would bring your energy down. I think it was around this time that my skill set as a medium started to reawaken, and I became more aware of these creatures as time went on. One of these creatures, it wasn't a scout, it was an incubus, and it would hang out in the kitchen just on the other end of the corridor. I knew it was there. To begin with, I didn't know what it was, but we'll come back to that. I'm now in this relationship, and we stayed in a hotel. We used to stay in hotels quite often, and there was this one hotel that we went to. We got to our room and we were unpacking our things, and he was wearing a hoodie that had one of those, had the strings on it, and I was standing next to him whilst he was unpacking something from a backpack, and I saw one of these strings get pulled. When how they're kind of springy, so when you pull it, if you pull and then let go, it sort of pings back like this. It did that, and I didn't think anything of it at the time, because I thought that he was leaning over his bag, sort of doing this whatever in his bag, and I thought maybe he'd caught it and it just pinged back. But shortly after it had happened, I noticed it happen. He did that. Obviously there's nothing there, so I was like, well, what? And he said, I swear someone just tapped me on the back. And I said, that's weird that you say that, because I just saw your cord just get pinged. And he was like, that's weird. That was the end of that, really. We spent our evening, and it was really nice, and we went to bed. And the following day, when we woke up, he said to me, I had some really strange dreams last night. Did you? And I was like, yeah, actually I did have some pretty strange dreams. And we both realised through our conferring of we shared what our dreams were, we had both been having basically the same dream, which led us to believe that maybe we weren't actually asleep at all, and we had experienced this whilst we were both awake, but we didn't think that we were awake at the time. We thought we were sleeping. There was a woman in the room who was wearing a blue dress. She there's no nice way of putting this. She basically hung herself in the room. She unalived herself in that room, and we both witnessed her swinging from the beam across the middle of the room. Lovely. We were very glad to leave that room and never go back to that hotel ever again. Ever since that hotel visit, he would stay over often, and he would often say to me, like, I got woken up last night in the middle of the night because that woman was standing by the side of the bed, or like, I keep hearing her calling my name and I keep thinking it's you, but the voice isn't quite right and I think it's her, or like, I dreamt about her again last night. Like, she obviously attached herself to him and then followed him back to 104. During that period of time, obviously there's like scouts in the house, there's a horrible entity in the kitchen, and like, my dad's energy was really low because, you know, of all the things that had gone on, and my energy was pretty low because of all the things that had gone on, and now my boyfriend has got an attachment from a hotel. It was just like, what next, you know? Like, what else do you want to throw at me? Like, it was just it was just ridiculous. And there were so many things that went on since we went to that hotel. Like, I used to have an iPad, and you know how you press the button down and then Siri will start listening to you? I used to use my iPad all the time for like watching YouTube videos and stuff. My boyfriend and I would often like go and treat ourselves to a pizza or something, and then we would sit cross-legged on the bed with the iPad and we'd be watching something, you know. So the iPad was like always sort of around. And I remember one night we were having this deep conversation that went on for like hours, and we were sitting on the bed, we were sitting facing each other, and we were just like chilling, and we were just having this really long, lovely conversation. And my iPad was leant up against one of the pillows, and it was like over there on the other side of the bed. And we had gotten on to the topic of ghosts. For hours we'd been talking about, I don't even remember what, because it was years ago now, but you know, we were talking about all sorts of different things. Then we got onto the topic of ghosts. He said something, it was quite lengthy, like what he was saying, and I don't remember what it was exactly that he was saying, but he was telling me about a time when he had seen a ghost, or like experienced a ghost. He said like this long sentence, and I was just about to respond when Siri responded. And Siri didn't respond in the way that like it normally would. Instead of saying like the answer to whatever it is that you've asked for, it just repeated the last half of the long sentence that he had just said. I mean, it was like 30 words. And so we were both like looking at this iPad in horror whilst it was saying what it was saying. And I looked at the text and I was like, it's just repeated back. That is exactly what you just said. And it's just repeated it back. And he was like, but it can't, like, it doesn't normally do that though, does it? And I'm like, no, it doesn't do that. And the only way to get Siri to speak is you have to press and hold in that button. And we were nowhere near it. So we both came to the conclusion that it was the lady that had followed him. I remember once we were both in the bedroom. He said, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I was like, okay, cool. He went down and then he came back up. I hadn't left the room. I was in the room the entire time. And he was like, okay, so something just really weird happened. So I was in the bathroom and I heard you call my name through the door, but you were, it was like with your normal speaking voice, so you weren't shouting, which meant that you were directly outside the bathroom door. And I was like, that wasn't me. I haven't called you at all. I was in here the whole time. And he was like, I know, because you called my name and I went, yeah, and you didn't answer. So I opened the bathroom door and there was no one there. And I was like, that's pretty weird. That wasn't me. He would often wake up in the middle of the night. Like, he would tell me then the next day that he had been woken up in the middle of the night because I had been calling his name, but it wasn't, but the voice wasn't quite right, like I said a minute ago. So must have been the woman. After a while, all of this activity just stopped with him and he wasn't experiencing it anymore. I didn't experience any of it at all. It was all him. She'd obviously just taken a liking to him and was sort of messing with him a bit. But what it had done was it had worn him down. And, you know, because he was like a new addition to the house, like he wasn't privy to any of the stuff. I'd told him, obviously, like all of the stuff that had happened in the house prior to his arrival, but he wasn't there for any of it. He didn't experience any of it. He had really high energy, like when he came into the house, and the house had worn him down a bit after that encounter. And plus he'd obviously been in the house around all of these scouts and whatever it was hanging out in the kitchen. I didn't know what it was at the time. And it had worn down his energy. Mine was already quite low and was getting low. Like, as each day went by with all of this stuff going on, both of our energy levels were just like dropping. It got to a point where there was so much just nasty energy, and, you know, we were hearing knocks, whispering. I used to hear whispering going on all the time. I would just be in the kitchen, broad daylight, middle of the day, making a cup of tea, and I would hear like low, hushed, deep voices like men talking from the other end of the corridor. And I'd look down there. It was just one long corridor, so I'd look down there to the other end, and there's no one there. I'm home alone, you know. That used to happen all the time. You know, now I know that's the scouts. They do things like that they do it deliberately to freak you out, so that your energy lowers, so it puts you in a fear state. That's what they do it for. The dogs were always on high alert. They would always like tear down that corridor, like they just didn't want to be in there. It was just all round horrible. It reached a point where I did not want to go into that corridor, and I avoided it as best I could. So if, I know it's terrible, but like if Dad got up to go to the kitchen, I'd be like, whilst you're in there, could you please fetch me a biscuit or something, like, so I didn't have to go down there. And he knew why. Like, I was very vocal with him about, you know, there's something in the corridor and I don't like it, and he was like, yeah, it doesn't feel very nice, does it? But he wasn't as sensitive as I was to it. I think like he felt it, but he tolerated it a bit more, and I think he rationalized it a bit more as well. He was always very, very logical, which is where I get my logic from, but yeah, he was able to rationalize it, I think, a bit more than me. He wouldn't let that stuff stop him from like living his life, whereas me, I would just hide in my room, didn't want to go down to the corridor. I would avoid going to the bathroom, because the bathroom downstairs was, the door to the bathroom was right by the entrance to the corridor, so you'd come down the stairs and then into the bathroom, or you would bypass it and go down the corridor into the kitchen. I would just avoid it at all costs. In the middle of the night, I would need to go to the bathroom. If my boyfriend was with me those nights, if he wasn't, I just wouldn't go to the bathroom until it was daylight. As if daylight made any difference. It just made me feel a little bit safer, I suppose. I just would not go downstairs by myself at night. If my boyfriend was with me, I'd wake him up and ask him to come with me to the bathroom, and he would come with. Bless him. I mean, absolutely bless his heart. He lost a lot of sleep because of me. But he would come with me, and he would just like hang out, you know, outside the bathroom whilst I just like pull the door up and go and have a wee, and then he would wait out there by himself in the dark whilst I went to the bathroom, and then he would come back up with me. And you know when you get that prickly feeling when you get into a space and you're like, I do not want to be here, I do not want to be in this room or whatever. As you're leaving it, you get this overwhelming urge to run from it. That's how I would feel going back up the stairs, and I had to will myself to not run upstairs, because I knew as soon as I gave into that feeling, I would start to panic. So I would force myself to just walk like, no, everything's fine, like I'm fine, it's all fine, up the stairs, like with him trailing behind me, and I'm just like squeezing his hand, like, oh, I just want to go back to bed. It was horrible. I laugh about it now, but it was absolutely terrifying downstairs. It was just horrible down there. The proverbial icing on the cake was when the Incubus, I realised what it was, that it was an Incubus, and it would basically beckon me to come downstairs to the kitchen. It wanted me to go downstairs by myself in the middle of the night to the kitchen. And we all know why, right? If you don't know what an incubus is, then I suggest you pause this video here and you go and Google it. It wanted me to go downstairs by myself, and we know why. I never did, by the way. I came to understand what it was and what it wanted, and that was absolutely terrifying, because honestly, I felt like I really did want to go downstairs. Like it had it cast a spell on me where it made me not fear it, and it made me really want to go downstairs. I'm not going to put too fine a point on that, and I'm also not going to discuss it too much because it makes me feel really, really icky. If any of you have had an encounter with such a creature, then please share your experience if you feel comfortable to do so in the comments, because it's really maddening what it does to you and how it makes you feel. Feeling like you want something to happen when you know deep down that you don't want it to. You absolutely do not want that, but it makes you feel like you do, it makes you feel like you're actually going mad. Yeah, so I had that to contend with for quite a while. I think eventually it just gave up because I think it realized that it was doing everything that it had power to do, and I was still not giving into it. I told my boyfriend, like, there is an incubus in the kitchen. It wants this from me. It's making me feel like I want to indulge it, but I'm not going to, and just the fact that this is happening is absolutely terrifying to me. I basically put a failsafe in place, and I said to him, if you ever catch me leaving the room in the middle of the night and I have not said to you I'm going down, like, because he knew I was terrified to go downstairs by myself, so I was like, if you ever see me go downstairs by myself, stop me or come with me and, you know, supervise me going to the bathroom or something, because at this point I don't know what's going to happen. Thankfully nothing did, and, you know, I think it just gave up because it realized that I wasn't going to give in, and that I knew, like, I was wise to what it was doing and what it wanted. One day it just wasn't there anymore, which I'm so grateful for, because that was just horrible. There's nothing really significant to speak of after that. My dad and I both just got more and more unhappy, and it was because of the space that we were in. Then one day, my dad just didn't wake up, passed in his sleep, and I discovered him. That was hands down the worst day of my life. After he passed, I lived in the house for some time and then I left. I'm not going to go into details about this part of things in 104 because it was extremely traumatic for me. But what I will say is that the energy was already really low, and when my dad passed and all of the events that subsequently unfolded happened to me, the energy went from low to, like, it just plummeted. It just plummeted to, like, ocean deep. That's when the D's moved in. I was just a shell of my former self, is probably the only way I can describe it. And so I left. And when I left, I went and lived in a lovely house with my boyfriend. But yeah, that is the story of 104. Just went from bad to worse. You know, the house got sold, and now there's a middle-aged couple living there. They've repainted the front door from white to red. Red is a very, very auspicious colour for a front door, by the way. I saged the absolute crap out of that house when I left. I doubt it was enough to lift absolutely everything that was in there, but I really do hope that that family have found some happiness and some joy in that house, because I not only did they deserve it, I'm sure, but I really feel that that house deserves to have happiness in it after so much sorrow and so much devastation. That being said, I think I'd like to dedicate this video to 104. May this sharing release all of that pain and sadness and devastation. May it release that from 104, from those walls, from that house, from that land. May it be born anew with the release of this video. Thank you, as always, for being here with me today. Thank you for sharing in this pretty sad story, I guess, really, hasn't it? I mean, as you can see, like, I am no longer in a horrible situation. I am in a beautiful house that is not haunted, and it is the most beautiful energy. I absolutely love my home. I'm in a totally different space, physically, mentally, spiritually. After a lot of hardship, I've now made it out to the other side of that proverbial dark corridor. Life is really good. Please don't worry about me or after effects or anything like that. I left 104 in 2018. It's been some time. I've made more or less a full recovery, so don't you worry. But yes, thank you for being here and sharing in this awful story with me. Go and watch some kittens or something playing with yarn together. Lift your emotional vibrational frequency after listening to such a horrible story. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I appreciate you all. Don't forget about Patreon. I'm just gonna just sort of throw that in there, quick shameless plug. If you're enjoying my content, you can support me over on Patreon. Gift yourself, treat yourself to some extra content over there that I don't share anywhere else at all. My Patreon feed is absolutely exclusive. So yeah, I will love and leave you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I trust that you will find something fun and exciting and constructive to get into for the rest of your day. Remember that you are loved and you are important, and I will see you in the next one.